Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm going to
Okay,
give you a quick intro.
super.
So I first learned about Linda actually on one of the multitude of podcasts that I listen to over this cold season while I'm starting my seeds. Just she has so much inspiring, diverse information to give about her operation, which I won't divulge too much about because I know she's going to talk about it. But she is in one of the most inhospitable climates in New York State, up in the Adirondacks there with Lindsay. But she's just been so innovative and taken her cues from nature and using her own sensibility in background in education and communications to really get the word out about the impactful work that she's doing. So we are absolutely thrilled to have her with us here today. And she's certainly happy to answer any questions, just like Zach did. Yeah, so take it away, Linda.
Super. Well, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here. And I really enjoyed Zach's talk. And I do think that a lot of things that I'm going to share with you today resonate well with his suggestions and hopefully share some ideas for how we implement some of those ideas and methods here on our farm. Like Carla said, we're in the northern Adirondacks and yeah, pretty inhospitable area. We're lucky to be in a little valley about a half hour away from Lake Placid. I think they're zone 3 up there. We're about zone 4 and warming for growing purposes. Our little plot, we had to make a move on our land in the wintertime, unfortunately, when the ground was frozen. And as soon as it thawed, I realized how wet it is. So we're already dealing with some of those projected problems that Zach was talking about, like increased precipitation. We're already trying to and having to deal with like lots of water and how we're going to work with that. And in our case, we decide not to fight against it too hard, but to be kind of smart in our variety choices. So we'll go into that a little bit more soon. But we sell flowers retail and wholesale. Probably do more wholesale this year. We're kind of trimming back on our retail offerings and our wedding offerings as we boost up our educational programmings. So we offer some online courses that are crop specific. I do that myself. I also do that with a business partner over in Vermont. Her name's Emily Von Trapp. She has Von Trapp Flowers, and together we co-founded a business called the Tulip Workshop. And we have some programs that we run together. One is based on tulips and the other one that we just released about lilies. Both are really focused on season extension and how to make use of some really easily programmable crops in our unpredictable climates and to have these kind of larger, more high value focal flowers over a very long period of time. And we've been doing some research here at my farm around roses specifically. So that's one of the programs that we've been developing here. And then I also do consulting with flower farmers who are looking to find ways to grow in cold climates or just innovative solutions to problems that come up for us all the time as flower farmers. And we also have an online program that we call the Pro Platform that's kind of like how people can see what's happening here behind the scenes. All those things, MacGyvered inventions and projects that aren't really easily shareable on social media without losing all of your potential customer base who's just there to see flowers. So that's kind of how that works. And I'll show you a little bit more as we work through it. So there's me and Emily. And one of the nice things about the programs that we do together is that we each grow these crops in different ways. And so we share how we do them on our separate farms and our different methods. All right, so let's see if I can make the little bubbles pop up here. Okay, so here are some of the challenges that we face up here and many of you may also face. Very cold temperatures, a short growing season, although maybe that's going to be lengthening a little bit based on what we're hearing from Zach. Short day length. And for our case, especially, we have heavy, wet clay soil that needs, we need to improve our aggregate composition for sure. That's something that we're working on all the time. And we also have seasonal high wind here. All things that are enemies of flower farming pretty much. And maybe Carla, you can keep an eye on the chat window because I don't think I can see it, and then just let me know if somebody has a question that pops up. All right, so here are some of the ways that we work to manage our farm in our climate. One is that we look to native plants. Another is that we work hard to understand the science behind plants that are successful in our environment, especially cold-loving plants. We look to support from the agricultural community and other organizations. We look to our community as a resource for basically supplementing some of the materials and supplies that we need on our farm. We look to clever and easy season extension. And then we also try to do things to keep the dollars here in our community and keep feeding our community and staffing our farm rather than outsourcing necessarily some things that we could potentially do here if we can figure out how to do them efficiently. So here are some of the examples of the inspiration that we take from the plants that are growing naturally in our area. I just kind of listed out some of the things that came to mind here. So for example, there's a lot of arrowwood viburnum in the meadow and along the forest line surrounding the meadow behind our property. Our little farm is about 2.5 acres, and it's separated off from a larger old dairy farm that is now defunct and unkempt. So it's just kind of like weedy meadow all over there. So, but there's still, you know, obviously lots of life out there. So we're looking in that area in the meadow, we're looking at the edge of the forest. In the forest, we're looking to see what things are already growing here in a happy manner and in our area. And then we're looking to the floral community to find out what the kind of like high value sister varieties, if you will, of those plants are, or the varieties that, you know, people are looking for in the floral community, the florist buyers. And we're choosing those other similar varieties based on the knowledge that they will likely do very well here. And we're seeing really great results with addressing our crop choices in this way. So there's some of the examples there. Yeah, a lot of these are really wonderful for floral work. This one, wild asters and choosing hybrid perennial asters. These are so long lasting into the fall and past frost. You know, we'll be looking all over the farm, and this will be pretty much the only thing that's blooming super, super late outside without cover. And we don't bother to cover them or protect them because we know they're going to last so long. So that's a really great crop. I'd love to have more of those. Keep growing them and bringing more in, I guess. All right, and then some of the plant science that we're considering when we're doing some of the trials here, and that when we're thinking about plants that we're going to bring in is this property of super cooling. This is the nature of the most cold hardy plants and animals actually that allows them to survive the winter. And what they're doing is actually vacating moisture and water from the cells in their bodies or in their plant structure before it freezes. And that way those cells won't explode and then cause damage and death to the plant. So I think that property is really fascinating. And I think understanding a little bit more about, you know, how these plants have developed and evolved into ways that make them the survivors in our harsh climate is super helpful. It also reminds us to not fall into the trap of just trying to grow what other people are growing all of the time, or take too large a risk and bring zone plants that are not appropriate for our zones here. We just have to kind of accept, you know, that we need to look for these survivors out there, and that's why they're important for us. We also have been moving more toward perennial beds, and there are a few reasons for that. One, we feel that they're kind of easier on our bodies. Another is that these well-rooted or deeply rooted perennials seem to be maybe a little bit more resistant to all these different fluctuations that we're seeing throughout our season, hot and cold all the time, and a little bit of unpredictability there. So we like that. We're also noticing, and we'll get into soil a little bit more, that we're just able to actually extend our season more by embracing perennials and not focusing so much on annuals and trying to get annuals into the ground in the early spring. And that has to do quite a bit with what Zach was saying about, driving tractors or doing tillage on wet soil. It's just going to compact it and lead to some big problems. I see that there's a question in the chat window, so I'll just pop that open real quick. Oh, great. What perennial asters do well in zone 4 in the field? I've only grown China asters. So these are asters that are closely related to like the purple asters that you might see growing in the wild. Perhaps I can look up some specific variety names, but there are some pink ones. There are some that look more blue and more purple, but they grow in those sprays, and they grow really big and bushy, and they're amazing filler for bouquets in the fall. I really love them. All right. And then some other great things to know are that if you decide to start using some of your covered space, or if you have covered space, and it's unheated even, you can gain a growing zone with that type of season extension. So we have a number of unheated caterpillar tunnels here that we had been really focused on rotating annual crops through them all the time. And then we started primarily with our research on roses, giving up some of that space to perennials, and then tucking in some companion plants and some annuals sometimes, but really thinking about that space as a healthy space for growing over the full course of the season, and trying to choose perennials that can be harvested from over the full course of the season, rather than going into these tunnels and just flipping them and flipping and flipping them, like I feel like we've been taught as flower farmers. So it's a different approach, and we're really enjoying what it's meant for our bodies, and also our yield in a different way. And then another thing that we're thinking about here is, if we're going to grow annuals, how should we be growing them here on our farm? And I think one of the biggest mistakes that flower farmers sometimes make is that they'll have this problem or this question, and they'll kind of like throw it out there to the world in like a Facebook group or whatever. And you'll find out quickly that the answers that come back to you are sometimes diametrically opposite. It's how do you sort through that when, someone's saying to do this certain thing, it works for them, and someone's saying to do something completely opposite, it works for them. So that kind of advice, I think, is really difficult. And so we are thinking here about getting really specific by the crop, by the variety, about what's going to work best for us. So for example, for a while, we just decided to recognize like dahlias aren't going to work well for us. We have too much of a problem with the tarnished plant bug. Our season's short, our soil is wet. Like I told you before, all of these things combine to be, not fun for dahlias. We tried growing them undercover. The tarnished plant bug still got into the tunnels. And now we're approaching them in a different way. Rather than planting them in the field and having to wait until the field dries out, we're putting them in pots, and we're growing them in pots, and we're overwintering them under our in our one minimally heated greenhouse, under the benches in pots in there. And then they'll wake up naturally because we have minimal heat in there, and we can take them out much earlier. We don't have to worry about the soil being wet. There are just a lot of positives to us to think about growing dahlias in pots, for example, rather than putting them in the ground. Again, like I feel like I was taught to do. Great. All right, so another thing that we do is seek support, and grants are a great way to get support. Zach mentioned NRCS and season extension, soil erosion prevention, high tunnel grants. Those are a great thing to look into, those equip grants. We've also worked with a local organization here called Compost for Good, and we are very fortunate to employ one of their founders on our staff, and she is the main person that helps us with our composting operation. And she encouraged us when she was looking at all the peat-based mediums that were coming in, all of the waste that was going out of our tulip forcing program, to investigate a high yield in-vessel composting machine. So that's something that a grant she helped us apply to buy this machine. I'll show you how the breakdown and the money worked out. And that's helped us move away from having to purchase some of those materials that we feel are pretty unsustainable, the peat-based growing mediums. We consider peat. On our farm, we consider that to be a non-renewable resource because it reproduces so slowly. So we are committed to reducing and eliminating our use of that. And so far, this project of creating our own growing mediums, our own compost has been really wonderful. And then currently we're working on a project with the Audubon Society. I think the chapter is at Northern New York Audubon Society, so may be applicable to some of you who are listening to this podcast today. They are working on a new program. It's a small farm grant program, and they have $1,500 grants available for farms that are going to implement measures to improve bird life on their farm. So this may be, in our case, we're looking to bring in a whole bunch of fruiting and berry producing shrubs, ornamental shrubs, that from the start will provide food in the fall and shelter for birds, and at least for a few years until we're able to harvest from them for our business. And even after that point, we won't be harvesting them, completely. Obviously, we'll be leaving a lot of growth on these shrubs. So those will continue to feed the birds. They also have some of that money available for people who want to add bird boxes to their farms and so forth. So that project is ongoing now. And I think that the grant applications are due January 31st. So I'm happy to connect after this with anyone who's interested in that. A $1,500 grant, for example, for us could help us bring 300 new ornamental fruiting and flowering shrubs to our farm. And that's through wholesale purchasing through Spring Meadow Nursery, I believe my farm manager is looking to source those from. So that's pretty exciting for us. Let's see here. Oh, yes, a link. I think I'll have to look it up and maybe share it with everyone afterwards. And yes, we are using our compost to make our own seed starting mixes.
And I will be sending out actually a copy of Linda's slide and a link to the recording. So any links that she provides me with, I will include in that email.
Awesome. Thank you, Carla. Okay, so in that kind of question about seed starting medium helps us sort of segue into this little diagram. We are really working with our community to take advantage of something that's a waste for them, food waste, and to help us turn it into compost and planting mediums and compost mulch, different materials that we can use here on our farm. And our composting machine is helping us with that. This is a 20-foot long, 4-foot wide drum machine, and it's mechanical. It actually operates off of just one household outlet, but it rotates automatically, and we add our food waste and our nitrogen and our carbon materials in the hopper, and then as it's rotating, the paddles inside push the finished material out the back. It takes about 4 weeks for the materials to go through. 21 days to 4 weeks. It depends on how much we're adding each day. And we do add a lot more during the summertime, for example. So let's see. Yeah, so some of the ways that we're collecting that waste from our community is that is helpful. Number one, we're in a very rural area, and the vast majority of our reach around here are the people who live in our area. They take their own trash to the dump, and it's weighed at the dump, and they have to pay per pound of waste that they're taking to the dump. So there is some incentive for them to offload all that heavy food waste here before they make their dump run, which is nice for us. So we have some collection buckets that we keep at the end of our driveway. They have screw top lids, and we have a little sign there that says, we love your food waste. There's a little jingle, but we don't want your foil or plastic or anything like that, basically. So, and that's been great in helping us keep any junk out of those buckets. And then we also have for our retail flower customers, a home delivery CSA of sorts, where we deliver weekly flowers. And when we deliver their flowers, they can opt into us taking away their food waste for free. And they leave their home composting bin on their porch or doorstep, and we empty it into our larger lidded containers, and we replace their bin on their step. We don't have to do any washing of their buckets or containers or anything like that. There's no like swapping of these things. And they understand that, they're going to have to wash their own bucket. And our customers really love that. The folks who are climate minded especially appreciate that offering. So let's see. Yeah, so this is just a little bit of a diagram. We collect the food waste, we add carbon materials, and sometimes that is wood chips, sometimes it's wood pellets, sometimes it's like weeds from the farm, grass, things that kind of like dry out in a pile. We do a lot of weeding because we are working away from using landscape fabric, and we're doing these no-till beds with lots and lots of rich organic matter on them. So we look at our weeding now as harvesting nitrogen sometimes, which is kind of fun, but if it dries out, we can use it more as a carbon-based material. Yeah, and then it goes through primary decomposition in our machine. When it comes out, there's a little bit of secondary decomposition that happens because our compost is still a bit warm, and then we're turning piles a little bit after that to have things cool down and get to the point where we can use them on our beds. And when we sift this material, when it's finished, that's when we can do a lot of planting in it. We do have, as a result of the previous work with all the peat-based growing mixes and potting mixes, there is like perlite still coming through in our finished product. So we do have some lightness, but just our proper balance of nitrogen and carbon turning into this finished material makes it a nice, I guess, aggregate composition, as Zach was explaining. And also really good for our super clay soil. So this is some of our annual costs of buying compost and soilless mixes in for our farm approximately. This is about 2 years old, these numbers now. So these costs would have gone up. We have been in the fortunate position now that we are not spending any of this money anymore. So it's not leaving our community and going to ProMix or going to the compost mulch that was coming in from pretty far away. I think South Carolina is where our local wholesale distributor was getting the compost from. Now it's here. Now I'm paying my staff to operate our composting operation. And there are 2 people whose jobs here are affected by that choice. And they help us manage our compost and turn our compost. And that's a part of their job description now, which is, I think, wonderful. All right. And then this was the total cost of our machine. And I'm sorry, I don't have any photos of the machine in this particular presentation. I do in some others that I give specifically about our composting project, but it looks a little bit like a small, I don't know, must look like a missile silo to the helicopters that fly over once in a while. They must be wondering what's going on here. So we got about $14,000, maybe even $16,000. I have to look at the exact number, but about that much from a grant from the Pollution Prevention Institute of New York State through RPI. And then we did a little bit of a fundraising project ourselves. And then we also chipped in and paid for some of this. But as you can see, for that $14,000 in just 1 year, we're pretty much able to keep that money here in terms of the costs that we were spending on compost and soilless mixes coming in. I really can't see if there's any comments, so I'm sorry if there's people asking questions.
Quick look. Okay, I can read you off anything that's come in.
Okay.
Let's see. Scroll up a little bit. Okay, so got a couple questions on the perennial asters that do well in zone 4 in the field. Folks have grown China asters, but would love to try some of the perennials. Do you know of any certain varieties or?
Yeah, I think I can get those variety names to people afterwards. Another great place to look is Bluestone Perennials. It's a retail online nursery. They have beautiful plants, beautiful product. Obviously it's retail, and I'll look there if there's ever something that I want to like kind of test out on our farm. I'll buy a couple of plants from them before I go into a big wholesale order, but you can find different kinds of asters, perennial asters on their website for sure.
And then there's questions about your seed starting mix. It's not peat based, correct? It's your own good stuff, right?
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then could you please send us a link to the Audubon Society grant as well?
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do that.
And then the last question that I have in this batch is, I've been told many times by people in the areas where the peat is grown that there's a big difference between peat moss and the actual peat. The peat is deep in bogs, and peat moss is more like the flower of the plant that regrows rapidly. And that what we have is sphagnum peat moss, not peat. Anyone have any knowledge as to the contrary to support this? She doesn't use peat, but she does have peat moss in the seed starting medium.
That's interesting. I think I'd have to look into that a little bit more myself. I think the only papers that I've seen, have been probably more related to peat bogs. I know, or at least I believed, that a lot of the material that is going into the peat-based growing mediums was damaging to these bogs in particular, but perhaps I'm wrong, and it would be good to know.
And I think that it is like a very energy consumptive process, just like any type of mining, where they're digging deep and have a lot of heavy equipment. So certainly, like if you have peat moss growing on the surface of your lawn like I do, and you want to incorporate it into your compost so that maybe grass will grow there, I think that's perfectly sustainable. But these big companies that are making the growing media are probably exploiting a natural resource, and anything that you can make on your own is just so much better for the environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're caught up on chat, Linda, if you want to proceed.
Great. Yeah. So some of the other ways that we work here in order to kind of, I'm trying to think if I want to make sure that I use the proper word, Zach, if it's mitigate or adapt to our climate and weather challenges, are to apply some simple season extension, low tunnels, for example. We often use them in ways that, I think a lot of people do, to protect our crops in the spring and the shoulder seasons. We've also used them here to protect perennials in the wintertime. So we actually put them through a cycle where we would use them for, in the spring, we'd erect them and get some annual crops started under them, get them going. And then once the season is really rolling, we take them down and we put them back up in the fall over beds of perennials that we are concerned about, or that might be kind of borderline for our zone. And they serve as a great way to protect them from moisture on their crown in the wintertime, and to kind of move things along a little bit in that way. And then we also have a series of caterpillar tunnels here that are unheated. And like I mentioned before, we're moving toward really experimenting with different kinds of perennials in these tunnels and turning them into perennial beds rather than annual beds. And one thing that we see that's wonderful is that we can gain a zone for perennials when we plant them in those unheated tunnels. And then for a number of years, I've been growing in my basement during the coldest months of the year. We have a farmhouse here, as our name suggests, and it has an old fieldstone cellar. The cellar maintains about 60 to 65 degrees year round, which is actually a really wonderful temperature for plants. And in the wintertime, because we are so far north, we actually don't have any problems with humidity down there, even when I have all my hydroponic systems going. We do have a dehumidifier for the shoulder seasons or for the summer that automatically empties as needed. But we found this to actually be a really clever place for us to grow without having to turn on a greenhouse outside and try to heat it to that temperature, to those happy growing temperatures. So we do a lot of tulips in our basement. We'll grow about 40,000 tulips in my basement this winter in different successions. And that's something that we get into really deep in our Tulip Workshop program. But it's one of my happiest growing spaces. We grow with LED lights. We don't have a huge electrical expense added to our bill growing with those LED lights. And the heat down there is the ambient heat from our home and our furnace. And, we're in an old farmhouse. So we don't have insulation between our floors. It's not the most efficient building for sure. But that's the heat. So we're not adding any additional heat down there. I attach a hose right to the bottom of our water pressure tank, and I can do all of my watering down there. I have grown in soil in the basement before as well. But now that I've learned some hydroponic methods, I really appreciate them. It's just a little bit cleaner down there in the basement. But we'll also use this space for lilies to extend our season from the fall into the winter and to get them going earlier in the spring too. And then we have now a modified caterpillar tunnel. It's a heated greenhouse of sorts, but I feel like our entry into this type of structure was a little bit softer than, purchasing a great big huge kit with all the bells and whistles that can be quite expensive. So we took a Farmer's Friend kit and modified it. So we added electrical, then we added heat, then we added ventilation, and we were able to do these things in steps to make it a little bit more easy on our finances. And now we have this space in the wintertime. We try to minimally heat it. So in that area, we're looking for plants that are happy growing around 40 to 50 degrees or overwintering other plants like our dahlias in their pots under the benches, for example. So we do some of our rooting for our tulips in this space. And then we also are growing anemone and ranunculus in there because their temperatures are work well together. They're happy at that temperature. All right. And then I think my last bit of advice is to really focus on keeping as much money as you can at your farm or in your community. I think this is important for the sustainability of farms and for our communities as well. So what we try to do is take a very close look at the resources that are available to us. We try to work with our situation instead of against it. So we have all this heavy, wet soil. We could spend money and sink money into draining it and putting in tons of drainage tile so that we could grow plants like other farms are able to grow in their better draining soil or in their situations. But instead of that, we look to the plants that are going to do well here, and where we have our wettest areas, we just plant wet, perennials and other plants that are going to do really well in those wet areas that love it. So that helps. And I think that in doing so, you also help set your business and your farm apart from mainstream. I feel like this has worked for us here instead of, just trying to copy what everyone else is doing, embracing these other things and becoming a bit of a knowledge sink for them is helpful. And I also always advocate for experimenting. I think, when we go into those online networks or forums and we ask a question and we get all these different ideas, ultimately, I think where I find my answer is in experimenting. So if I have a crop here, we're typically planting it a number of different ways. Even if we feel like one way is going to be better than the other, we're still going to risk a portion of that crop to learn something in the process, to learn if there's a better way, to learn if we can grow it healthier, to find out if fewer pests will come in that way. And I think that you also find when you look to native plants and are pretty clever about your selection that you have fewer problems with pests, because the plants that are designed to do well here or on your farm are probably designed to work in concert with the insects and bugs that are there too, and the fungus and all of that. So seek advice from people who have done what you hope to do. Find those people. If you're soggy like us, find other people who are going in soggy situations and ask them for ideas. And then reuse and repurpose free materials. Zach mentioned chip drop. That's a service that we had looked into here. Unfortunately, we are so rural. There are no providers on the chip drop app for us. And I think that's because the arborists around here have plenty of places where they can drop their chips without having to get rid of them. But we do keep a nice wooden sign out at the end of the driveway that says that we're looking for wood chips. And so once in a while, we'll have some arborists who are working in this area and they just don't feel like driving the chips back up to Lake Placid or wherever, and they'll bring them in and we have an area where they can drop their wood chips for us. So that's super helpful. Let's see. Oh boy, there's a lot more questions now.
Yeah, there's some more questions. If you can see them now, you can go ahead and field those, or I can read them to you, up to you.
Okay.
And keep the questions coming.
Yeah.
This is your chance to pick Linda's brain.
All right.
Okay, I think it starts out with Jenny shared her suggestions for perennial asters, the New York, New England, Blue Wood, and Smooth. She's in 6B, and she recommends checking with your local conservation office. And also, yeah, that's a great suggestion. You go in, depending on where you live, it'll be called different things. In Delaware County, it's Soil and Water Conservation District. And every year they have a plant sale. And they offer lots of native shrubs, things like 9-bark, winterberry, that are great for foliage, cut flowers. So yeah, it just really depends on your area. And if you have specific things you want for them, you might be able to talk them into getting them from the state when they're making their decisions.
Yep. Great. And I see a question about getting a grant for our tunnels. Do we leave the plastic on all winter? And what about the low tunnels? We did not get grants for our Farmers Friend tunnels. I actually haven't had the best of luck connecting with NRCS in our area. I know that they're super communicative and easy to work with in some areas, but I think there's been some turnover in our office in the time that I've been farming here, which is about 5 or 6 years. So we've had a little bit of trouble there. So I've just added them sequentially and in like 1 or 2 at a time. I do like that Farmers Friend, I don't know if they still offer this promotion, but if you order 2, you get one of them shipped free or something like that. So you save shipping on one. So that's pretty nice. We do leave the plastic up all year on our Farmers Friend tunnels. And so they are actually overwintering and protecting a lot of our perennials. So like my rose crop, my hypericum, delphinium, trying to think of some of the other things we have in there. Pieris, which we can't grow outside here. We're too cold for Pieris. Yeah, so we leave the plastic up, and the tunnels, especially the Gothic Pro or the Gothic Profile from Farmers Friend, they shed the snow beautifully. I have no qualms about going away on vacation and a big snow coming because it just sheds wonderfully. And actually, even we have one of their original classic models that has the round top, and it also sheds snow really well. So, we certainly can go out and clear them off if we want to, but they work pretty well for that. For low tunnels, if we're leaving them up over the winter time, we do need to, we find we do need to clear them off when we get a big snow. So let's see. And then the LED lights are, I think the brand is Barina. They are linkable LED lights, which I appreciate because we can connect a whole bunch of them together. You do have to be really careful about what your electrical load is in the space where you're working, so that you're not maxing that out or doing anything dangerous. And obviously you can't be watering from above your lighting fixtures. So there are some important things to consider if you're setting them up. But a lot of people will find that your seed starting lights, if you have seed starting lights, are perfect to work with in a growing space like a basement. I started out with the lights that were available to me, least expensive, a number of years ago, and those were just like fluorescent shop lights. And over time, I upgraded to the lights that I have now. But I don't use any of the fancy like grow lights that are marketed to farmers and growers. None of the purple or red or any of that. I don't find that to be necessary.
It's a little disconcerting to walk into your room and it looks like a rave.
Yeah. And the heat source in our tunnel is a Modine heater, and it's propane, unfortunately, propane. And we are saying minimal heat. We're talking about like 40 degrees, sometimes 50 degrees. It depends on what we're what project we're working on in our tunnel. And do we find the transition from hydroponic to soil shocks the transplants or no? So our hydroponic is hydroponic all the way. That's what we're doing. We're not doing a transfer from one method to the other. So we're doing it from, planting to harvest. It's all hydroponic. Yes, a best cover crop individual or mix for cut flower beds. I feel like there's so many out there. I don't know that I can give you the best answer. I can tell you we've used winter wheat and different kinds of clover. Been happy with those, but I don't feel like I'm an expert in cover crop. So yeah, I don't.
It looks like Nat has a hand raised. Nat, you want to unmute and chime in?
Thank you. I figured I would write my questions also just in case. So yeah, thank you. I was asking about your experience with the cover crops. So I just wrote down your winter wheat and clovers. I appreciate that. And I had a second question, and this goes back to when you were talking about your caterpillar tunnels and how when working the rotation with your annuals in there, you started to work your perennials in that rotation or to diminish that rotation. I just was wanting for I don't know, maybe you can give an example so that I understand better how you are managing that perennials and caterpillar panels and annuals.
Yes, I'm sorry. So the perennials, they stay put. They don't move in and out of the tunnels.
Right.
We do consider ourselves to be kind of like a research-based farm. So we're trying a lot of things all of the time. And just because I plant a perennial in one of those doesn't mean that it's going to make the grade and stay there forever. Yeah. And for our annuals, we're leaving space. It might be a portion of a row, or it might be co-planting with some of our larger perennials, like the Hypericum or the Pieris that we're working on. When they're young, there's a lot of room around them because they need to be spaced pretty far apart. So those are opportunities for us to plug in something that could be happy there potentially. The plants that I really still love as annuals to grow in my tunnels are things that are heat loving, like celosia. That's a plant, that we can use fresh or dried. If I'm going to grow an annual anymore these days, we do a little bit of everything still, just to kind of like have a little bit of everything. But our focus for annuals is more in that vein. It's can we use it fresh and dried? I want to be able to store it and have sales in the fall or winter if we have excess. So I'm not taking on too much loss. But I guess our loss now is the gain for our composting machine. So it would just go on to feed Greta. We call our composter Greta Thunberg. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's bad. You're welcome. All right. I think that's through the questions. Oh, one more.
Oh yeah, we have some questions about dried flower crops.
Sure. Yeah. So our main dried flower crops, definitely celosia, straw flower, little things like little more dainty things like amobium. You can see behind me here, this is all perennial baby's breath. That's a big dried flower crop for us. And that's a perennial that we grow undercover because of the challenges of growing baby's breath outside in the wind and rain. Inside, we don't need to use any netting, and it gets huge, as tall as we are. And it blooms several times over the season. So those are hybrid baby's breath varieties that we're growing. They're not, I don't believe, available from seed. You need to buy them as plugs. Trying to think of what else is hanging up in we have lots of allium. We dry lots of allium. I love dried allium. It has such a fun, like, it looks kind of stellar, or like I don't know, these like, like fireworks when they dry. Status, easy. All of these things work really well into market bouquets throughout the season, and then we can dry them. The allium is perfect for this window, this gap of time that we have between sort of like when the peonies end blooming and the summer annuals come in. I feel like I can't have enough allium. I keep buying more and more and more allium to fill that gap. And then being able to dry what we don't use is really great. Perennial baby's breath. We get it from Farmer Bailey. Yeah, so we buy it in wholesale, and I think it comes 50 plants to a tray. So maybe that's manageable, not too scary. Not sure of your size.
Okay. Wow. Well, that was amazing.
Oh, good.
So inspired.
Thank you.
So tell us about some of these upcoming opportunities with you.
Yeah, sure. I have a couple more slides. This one just showing, you know, these educational programs that we have. So my business partner, Mike and Emily and I really found that there was an opportunity and to provide some crop specific in-depth learning. And we had been teaching programs in person before the pandemic, and then our prospective students were like, can't you just do this online, do it online? So we did it by Zoom a little bit, and ultimately decided that we really need to have a professional crew come and film everything. So our courses are filmed over a long period of time. Our tulip course was filmed over the course of an entire year. My rose course will be as well when it's all said and done, so that students can see every step of the process and get some really in-depth understanding for what goes into everything. So the www.thetulipworkshop.com is where you can find these two programs. And then on my website, information about the cold climate rose program that's coming up. Or if you want to get on my email list, that's probably the best way to be notified when it's ready for registration, so that I can find you again. And then we do some separate consulting help for people. So I mentioned that ProPlan membership, and that's something that our clients subscribe to weekly monthly or yearly, depending upon what is best for them, and gives them access to a whole bunch of different sort of behind the scenes videos of things that are actually going on here that we wouldn't normally put out there in the public facing social media platforms for our business. And then a whole bunch of additional resources that are harder to come by or not readily available in our industry that we've kind of worked hard to compile. They're available there too. And then I'm always happy to talk with people one-on-one about their situations or organize special visits here. We do all of those things too. And this kind of different income stream has really developed in a beautiful way for our farm. I'm a former teacher myself, so I love it. But obviously it has to take the place of something, and it's going to, and it already is taking the place of selling more of the flowers. So we're doing more research with what we grow and learning more about it so that we can share that information, less of a focus on putting our getting our flowers out there. So it's a different thing. We're in a bit of a transition between the two worlds right now. But I do feel like things are kind of coming full circle for me in terms of my background in education.
Well, we were so lucky to get you today to educate us and to share your story and share all the innovative things that you do, especially you in combination with Zach. What a dream team.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I have this last slide here. This is the organization that I was talking about. This is a local to Lake Placid, New York, but they work with farmers, schools, people all over the world who are looking to begin community scale food waste composting projects. And they're amazing. So they're a nonprofit organization. They seek grants so that they can pay themselves to help other people for free. And part of our relationship with them is that our composting facility here is always available as a free educational resource for others. So if you'd like to come here and see how our composting works in person, we can set up a tour for you with Katie Culpepper. She's our person here. And she weekly, I think, hosts several different groups per week seem to come through here for tours of that sort. So
well, I'd love to get some Delaware County folks up there this summer.
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
We'll make a plan. That's awesome. Great. Well, thank you both so much again. This was recorded, so I'll be editing. I'll put it up on our website pretty soon, but then I'll edit it with the proper transcription and everything and get the whole series on YouTube eventually.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carla.
Well, thank you, Linda, and thank you, Zach and Lindsay, and everyone else for being here today. For anyone who's getting snow, stay safe and warm and take good care. And there's a lot of compliments there in the chat there, Linda. for you to
Awesome.
Check out.
Awesome.
So
Thank you
really
so much.
appreciate it. Love the idea. Let's not fight nature. Let's go with the flow. Learn from it. Absolutely.
Very inspiring, Linda. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. I loved your talk as well. I took lots of notes, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, you guys. And hope to see you next week for Judson Reed talking about actually high tunnels themselves, how to select them, how to grow in them. And then we will have Tony Caprero from NRCS talking a little bit about the grant. And then I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about ways to extend the season that don't involve having to install a structure, which Linda already touched on, caterpillar tunnels, row covers, etc. But also these little dried flowers, right? Foraging. There's so many things that we can do to make a little bit of extra money in the off season. Again, not fighting nature. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.